Okay, I'm going to talk to you about mind-brain identity theory. Mind-brain identity theory is the exact opposite of substance dualism. Where substance dualism postulates the existence of two categorically different substances, physical and non-physical, mind-brain identity theory postulates the existence of only one substance, physical substance, which then has physical properties. Mind-brain identity theory is a physicalist theory, and if you can't remember what that is, physicalism basically says that the whole of existence is ultimately fundamentally physical. If you wanted to understand the universe and the laws of the universe, what makes it up and how it works, we'd ultimately come down to physical constituents like atoms or quarks or laws of nature and so on and so forth. There's nothing that escapes these laws of physics. And so the claim of physicalism is that the mind should really be ultimately understood and reduced to the physical world and physical truths. Now, the key kind of thesis of mind-brain identity theory is that the mind and mental sensations, things like seeing an image, like that yellow spot over there, that is ultimately identical to a brain process. J.J.C. Smart, in his seminal work on this, summarizes it thus. This is the thesis that sensations such as experience of seeing a red patch or feeling pain are identical to physical chemical brain processes. I'll read more. Insofar as after image or ache is a report of a process, it's a report of a process that happens to be a brain process. All it claims, this is mind-brain identity theory, is that insofar as the sensation statement is a reporting of something, that something is in fact a brain process. Sensations are nothing over and above brain processes. So what he means by nothing over and above, he says that sensations are ultimately made up of, they're explained by brain processes. Just as a nation is ultimately its population and its government and so on and so forth, you're not going to find a nation, a kind of ideal object somewhere called the nation. What you find is ultimately people and institutions and government and all that kind of stuff, legislation. And the claim is here, there's nothing over and above the physical that makes sense of the mental. Now, one of the positive aspects of mind-brain identity theory is that it dissolves the problem of causation. If you remember, substance dualism had the issue of trying to explain how it is that a non-physical, immaterial substance is able to affect the world and how the world can affect it. We saw how Descartes got into contortions trying to deal with that. Ultimately, mind-brain identity theory just kind of denies that it's worth fighting that corner. It says, look, the mind is effectively brain processes. And so if we want to explain physical behavior in humans, we just point to what's going on in the brain and we say there's processes happening here which explain what's going on with their behavior. And if something affects your body, that's going to create brain processes here which make sense of what's going on in your experience. So there isn't that problem. We can fundamentally understand all causation in the mind, the two-way causation between the mind and body as physical. So it dissolves that problem, so to speak. There are two different kinds of mind-brain identity theory. So some people say that to be in pain is to have a certain specific type of mental thing happening. So like maybe C fibers firing. Others want to be more specific. It's actually every different sensation that we have has a different brain process or a different thing happening. So they specify it down to the individual occurrences as opposed to the types of occurrences. There can be debate about that, which we don't need to go into in any depth, but it's worth you knowing that there's those two different theories. When J.J.C. Smart wrote his seminal paper on this, sensations and brain processes, he gave back 7 or 8 objections. I'm going to give you a couple and then how he responds to them. The ones that I think are most significant. Well, one of the problems is the objection that you could have certain brain processes, and those brain processes you'll have intrinsic knowledge of, in the sense of you'll have extrinsic knowledge of the sensations. But you wouldn't know anything about the brain, right? I might see yellow, I might have seen yellow many times. I don't know what process is going on in my brain which makes sense of that yellow patch. So how can it be, if they're the same, if seeing yellow is the same as having a brain process and they're identical, how come I don't know both facts? J.J.C. Smart doesn't think this is very important. He says, well, there's many things that you are aware of and are acquainted with which you don't know the consequences of not that knowledge. I might know what water is. I might drink water every day. I might know it comes from certain places, but I may not know it's H2O if I hadn't been taught that. That doesn't mean I don't know what water is. In the same way that I might be familiar with the sensation of yellow, but I just don't know that there's a certain brain process involved in that sensation. That's not that unusual. Scientific theory and investigation tells us, opens up these kinds of things. The other objection that we can say is something like that sensations are private, and I have access to my sensations and you don't have access to my sensations. There's an asymmetry there. Well, how can they be the same if my sensation of a yellow patch is private to me and you can only know by listening to my voice that I'm seeing yellow patch? You can't know what I'm seeing specifically, not in my head. How can they be the same? And I think JJC Smart's way around this is to say something like, well, they're not really private, because if we knew enough about the brain and we worked out what goes on when someone's having a sensation of yellow, they'd become public, right? We'd be able to tell someone's seeing yellow by looking at their brain scan, for example. Finally, another objection is that we can conceive of our consciousness being in a non-organic thing, like a stone. We can conceive our mind leaving our body. So if that's conceivable, it's unimaginable, then surely there's a distinction between those two concepts. I think what JJC Smart says here is important, because he will come back to something which will come across occasionally. There's a difference between knowing something a priori and knowing it a posteriori, but that doesn't mean that the a posteriori thing is necessary. So for example, I might not know that water is H2O. I might not know that a certain pain in my head is a brain process in my head. But that doesn't mean it isn't that. It just means I have to learn it from empirical discovery. Right? So when I find out that a certain brain process is causing me to have a sensation, that's a necessary connection between the two. It's not contingent. We've just found out a necessary connection after investigation, right? I think the only thing that one can say in favour of this argument is that we don't know a priori that the mind is the brain, but that's not a problem, and I don't think mind-brain identity is affected by that. I want to say one more thing before I finish. It's important to understand identity. By identity, we mean that something's exactly the same thing as itself, so to speak. So, for example, a lightning, the phenomenon of lightning, the actual thing out in the world we call lightning, is an electrical discharge. There isn't lightning and electrical discharge, they are rather one and the same thing. The concept of lightning and the concept of electrical discharge are different, but that's irrelevant. You can have two concepts name one thing. And so identity isn't troubled by that. Remember, mind-brain identity theory just wants to say they are the same. Pain just is a process in the brain. We can think of pain and think of processes in the brain as two different concepts, and they are two different concepts, but they happen to point to the same thing. So that's mind-brain identity for you in a nutshell. I hope it's been helpful. In the next video, we're going to look at objections to mind-brain identity, which have much more traction than the one JJC Smart looked at. Take care.